we will be hearing from the first meeting of the Policy Subcommittee for the Commission on Health and Environmental Impacts of Perfluorinated Chemicals. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting that we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of the commission, as temporary chair as chair of the commission and temporary chair of the subcommittee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on Zoom and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@leg.state.nh.us. That's remotesenate@leg.state.nh.us or call 603-271-3043. 603-271-3043. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. And finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. And when each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. And Representative Rung will call the roll. And I will then leave the meeting. Well, no, I guess we have to conduct a vote for chair, would be the next chair of the subcommittee. But after we call the roll, so we will vote for a chair of the subcommittee. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Nodder, absent. Representative Bohm. Ms. Harrington.
Hi, I am in Merrimack, New Hampshire, and I am in this room alone. My husband's in the other room.
Okay. Chris Badazian. Oh, Chris, I think you're on mute.
I am present in Bedford and at home by myself.
Okay. Mr. Wimsatt.
Yes, I'm present in the office in Concord and I'm alone.
Okay. Ms. Fordy.
Hello, I'm in Litchfield. My husband is upstairs. He should stay up there. And this one will cry if I don't hold him for a little bit, but he keeps secrets, so we're good.
Senator Chandley.
Good afternoon. This is Shannon Chandley. I am at home in Amherst and I am currently alone in the room.
Okay. Senator Deitch.
I am in Peterborough and I am, my husband is on the screen porch with me.
Okay. And I'm Rosemary Rung. I'm in Moultonborough. My husband is on the premises, but he shouldn't be in this room. Okay. The roll is complete.
Okay, so we need a nomination for chair of this subcommittee. I am temporarily acting as chair, but I am not a member of the policy subcommittee. So who would like to lead the policy subcommittee, or who would like to nominate someone to lead the policy subcommittee?
I'll be happy to volunteer to lead it, Senator Deitch, if there's no opposition or other nominations.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I will second that
Representative Rung.
nomination.
Thank
This is
you.
Shannon Chandley.
Thank you very much, Senator Chandley. Okay, do we have any other nominations? Hearing none, all in favor of Representative Rung being chair of the Policy Subcommittee?
We'll have to take
by
roll.
roll.
We have to do it by, excuse me.
I would like to ask if I'm going to serve as chair, is there someone that can take notes and call the roll when necessary?
Okay, so we need a volunteer to take notes for this meeting. And can we?
And also to be the clerk of the committee.
Mhm.
It's really
to-
calling the roll and just jotting some notes. Ava's probably going to be taking notes, so.
Also, to make it easier for whoever that person is, just so you know that there'll be a recording on YouTube, and I can also give you a video recording of the subcommittee meeting so that when you're going through the notes after the meeting, you can supplement whatever notes you are taking, contemporaneously with the video.
I'll volunteer.
Thank you,
Thank
Nancy.
you.
You owe me,
Thank you.
Rosemary.
Well, I'm chairing, so.
I know, that's why.
Yeah,
We'll be
okay.
in communication.
All right,
Okay.
so Nancy, the roster is in chat, so if you wouldn't mind going through and we'll take a vote. The motion on the table is a nomination to have me serve as chair of the subcommittee.
Should I rescind my second and make a different motion that we appoint or we elect Representative Rung as the chair and Ms. Harrington as the clerk of this subcommittee?
Sounds good. I'll second that.
Well, you have to amend it, Rosemary and Chan,
Oh, okay, so
and
Senator
Shannon
Chandley
will
is making
second
a
that.
motion. She's making the motion to amend the nomination motion. So, so that's just a vote to amend. So I will, and you made the motion. So I second the amendment.
Okay, good enough.
Can I just suggest that we just rescind the first motion and make the correct motion so we only have to vote once?
Right.
Okay.
So I rescinded my second, and Representative Rung, if you'll rescind your motion,
And I do rescind my motion.
and I will make the motion that I will move that we elect Representative Rung, our chair, and Ms. Harrington, our clerk of this policy subcommittee.
And I'll second that.
Okay. Okay, and if you would read the roll then.
And who should do that?
Sure. Nancy, would you?
I should,
Harrington,
okay.
would you read the roll, please?
Representative Rung,
Yes.
Representative Nada, not present. Representative Bohm, not present. Myself, yes. Chris Bandazian,
Yes,
did I pronounce that correct, Chris?
you did. Yes.
Mike Wimsat,
Yes.
Nikki Forty,
Yes.
Senator Chandley,
Yes.
and Emma, are you here as a member?
Yes, I sent a message. was recently added.
Okay.
So for the record, I vote yes. I'm present. My 7-year-old is learning behind me. My 5 and 3-year-old and grandfather in the room right in front of me.
So we need to record that Emma Paradise. Is it Parody or Paradise?
Paradise,
Okay,
just short of paradise, actually.
okay. Is
Bad joke,
also a
bad
member
joke.
of the subcommittee roster. And it is approved, 2 not present, and 1 I should be, see, I've got to get in this role. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yes.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will hand over chair to Chair Rung.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just review what our charge is for the subcommittee and ask if there are any questions or clarifications that are needed. And I want to thank Ava Hawks very much for making this easy for me. The first one is developing prioritized governmental and community actions at the state level. So I interpret that meaning that if there's anything that comes up from the commission that we feel needs action at the state level, either from non-government organizations, community groups, or the state, that we would then recommend what those actions should be. The second one is delineating the potential roles and responsibilities for state agencies and their partners, what's appropriate for them to respond to any health or environmental impacts from PFAS exposure, and also recommending legislation as necessary to carry out the charge of the commission or resulting from any commission findings. Are there any things that we should get into statute that would be necessary from what we've learned from the commission? So I'd like to just open it up for any comment or questions people may have on that. No? Okay, then let's move forward. And as far as an agenda for today, I think it was really to go over that. And is there anything, when we talk about policy, is there anything that has come up to date from our work on the commission that you think should be more formalized, either through legislation or recommendations? Or is there anything that's really come up that you think we should be following up on or making a recommendation on?
If I may.
Yes, yes. Chris.
It's probably skipping ahead to legislation, but on the environmental subcommittee, we had some discussion about adding a representative from Londonderry. However, currently the statute focuses on study of Bedford, Merrimack, and Litchfield. So I doubt anyone from Londonderry would be excited about studying our three towns and not their own. So there would need to be an amendment to add Londonderry, and then an amendment to, I think, Section 8 to add a Londonderry member appointed by their governing body. We also had some discussion about whether the Amherst TCI site ought to be brought in. I frankly don't know enough about the site to know if that would advance or hinder efforts, but there was discussion about if that was brought in to have representatives from Amherst, Hollis, and Nashua as well. I think that's probably the major thing that we discussed that would have to be addressed by legislation.
And just to let people know what the calendar is like, incumbent reps have had the opportunity to introduce legislative service requests, LSRs. And that window will open again after the election. I forget the exact date. It's probably in December. I don't know if the Senate follows the same calendar as the House does. But that it does not, Shannon? Senator Shanley? Okay. So we'll have to look at that, but I think those are very valid points. Yes, Mr. Wimsatt?
Yeah, I just wanted to contribute. Actually, I was speaking with one of the senators this morning and confirmed that I believe the House's calendar opens up the second session for LSR receipt the day after the election. I think it runs for 2 weeks after that. And then, of course, the Senate kind of makes its own rules, and they get together to decide. And the senator I spoke with thought that they would probably set up a time period that would end sometime in December.
Does anyone have any questions or comments in response to Mr. Bandazian's recommendation to submit legislation to expand the commission to include Londonderry? Senator Shanley?
Yes, thank you, Representative. I think that it was my understanding that although the towns that were named in the legislation that formed this commission, much of the fact finding or that would be done or recommendations that would be made would certainly be applicable to any and all towns that are looking, that are having PFAS contamination issues. I have absolutely no problem with increasing the scope a little bit by including folks from Londonderry, Amherst, Hollis. That would be fine with me. I would not object to putting forward legislation. I think that there's only so much that we as a commission can do. And I know that, and Mr. Wimsatt can speak to this, there's so much going on with these various sites, but ultimately as citizens, we have similar concerns across the state where there is PFAS contamination, and welcoming a couple of new members onto the commission I would not in any way be opposed to that and be happy to move forward.
Are there any other comments? I'll offer mine. I would have to confer back with Representative Murphy, but I believe the spirit of her original bill to set up this commission was to make sure that communities that have been impacted by manufacturing contamination, corporate contamination, as we've seen in Merrimack, Bedford, and Litchfield with Saint-Gobain, that they would have a voice and representation to study what those effects are and to propose solutions. I think what we've learned since then is that this type of contamination isn't just restricted to Saint-Gobain, as you've mentioned with TCI and Hollis and Amherst. So we may find that there maybe are even more sources of contamination from a manufacturing facility. So perhaps we could kind of redefine the commission to represent those communities who have been directly impacted by manufacturing contamination, and then have representation of those communities on the commission. Now, the flip side of that is we don't want the commission to be so unwieldy that we don't get anything done. So so I'm just throwing this out this for discussion. So let's say if we pass a new bill to replace this commission with a new one, which would probably be the same constituents we have now, but just generalize it to communities that have been directly impacted by PFAS contamination from a from a corporate or manufacturing enterprise, and that up to 5 representatives from impacted communities can be nominated and serve on the commission. Because right now we have 3, Londonderry would be 4. But I'm thinking, what if there's a community in Concord or Manchester or another community downwind from Saint-Gobain? I mean, what's the response to that? So instead of being specific to Merrimack, Litchfield, and Bedford, if we open it up to all communities who have had direct contamination of their groundwater, and then make sure that those communities can offer a nominee to be considered to join the commission, but those nominees are still limited to maybe 4 or 5 people. Was that confusing?
No,
My
that makes
My
sense.
only concern is that you're going to get it's going to become unwieldy. I do
Right.
agree with the concept of having expanded representation, but how do you control the outer limits? Sorry, Nikki.
No, that's like exactly what I was going to say.
Okay. Yeah.
I have had people, the Litchfield Londonderry border is kind of arbitrary. So, I mean, I have had people who are like, why isn't Londonderry represented? I mean, I know that even just since I joined the commission, that there has been people in attendance from Londonderry. We've had people, provide some input, but that they're not officially represented. So I have heard that concern. But on the flip side of it, yeah, it can start to get a little too much. And then how much of it is getting people up to speed and impeding the progress. When we're looking at the charge of specifically of the policy subcommittee, these are very action oriented. And we need to consider, how inviting many more people in would get us further away from taking action, if that makes sense.
Mr. Wimsatt, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so I'll preface my remarks by saying, if this were to translate to legislation, that's something that gets reviewed up through our senior leadership. And so I'm not prepared to say where we'd be on a particular bill, but I think I can offer some insights to help you in the discussion. I guess, first of all, with regard to Londonderry, many of us at DES, as we worked on this, we were very aware of the geographical extent of the impacts that the St. Gobain emissions had. And we were actually a little surprised that Londonderry wasn't included, because indeed they were, we believe that their locations in Londonderry, they were absolutely impacted by those emissions. And for argument's sake, it's also true in southern Manchester on its border with Litchfield. There were some impacts there as well. So, theoretically, you could, if you were trying to include comprehensively all the communities we believe have had, meaningful impacts from St. Gobain, Londonderry and Manchester could certainly be included in there. As we at DES think about the southern New Hampshire problem, it's certainly, we soon after we started working on the St. Gobain emissions problem, we evaluated and learned about the TCI problem in Amherst. So when we think of southern New Hampshire and the PFAS problem, we absolutely include, Hollis and Amherst and in that. Having said that, I'm very sensitive to what others here at the subcommittee have said about, getting too big, because one advantage you have is if you keep it to the communities that were impacted by St. Gobain, then in essence you've got one manufacturing facility, you've got one sort of focus, and there's no question about it. The St. Gobain emissions impacts were much more widespread and extensive than what we believe has occurred at TCI. And that's not to diminish what occurred at TCI, because it was indeed substantial, and it's something that we continue to work on. There's also a difference between I apologize. There's also a difference between the two cases, in the sense that St. Gobain, really has done a lot of work in response to the DES's requests for investigation and dealing with water line extensions and such. And that's less true, but it's not to say that TCI hasn't done some response, because they have, but the scope and the breadth and the depth of their response is much smaller than what St. Gobain has done. So there may be, as you discuss this, some strategic value in sort of keeping it limited to, the communities that were impacted by St. Gobain, understanding that the policy matters and the other issues that you raise and try to advance are likely to have benefits for everybody who was in this situation, including the communities around TCI. I'll leave it at that.
Very good points. Another consideration too is maybe the mode of contamination, because St. Gobain, it's through air emissions that get on the soil and then leach into the groundwater. And maybe we're opening up ourselves too much if we look at other polluters that maybe do direct contamination into surface water that gets into groundwater or something like that. So, how about, as far as an action item, why don't I bring this forward to Representative Murphy and talk about proposing a bill that would expand us to include Londonderry. I mean, I'm afraid if we include Manchester too, or South Manchester, it might be hard to delineate that area. And again, it would just expand the commission to maybe an unmanageable number of people. Yes, Nikki?
What I also think that we might be able to do in terms of what the communication subcommittee could also very well be charged with disseminating some of the information and the recommendations that we're making to other communities that maybe don't have direct representation, but there's no reason why they can't also be informed about what we're doing and attend, as attendees or submit testimony. There are other ways that I think communities, I agree with adding Londonderry because of the direct, there's very much a direct correlation and how they've been affected. But then as you start to branch out more, maybe it's more leaning on the communication side and inviting in a less formal manner, people from other communities if they have questions or input.
Okay. So, Mr. Badazian, to your point about expand, or I forget who, if it was you or
Yeah.
Ms. Forty that recommended expanding to Amherst Hollis. Do you think that's kind of getting beyond our reach, that we should stay focused on St. Gobain's impact?
I do. We had talked about TCI, and I don't know enough, and it doesn't sound to me like it's as manageable to jump in right now. So I'm in favor of adding Londonderry. And back in the very beginning, I don't know if Londonderry had many, if any, over 70 parts per trillion wells, and I think that's probably why they're not included. Now that we have a new standard, there's a very high number.
Mhm.
It makes sense to add them.
And I do think Londonderry did have at least one person that participated in the public hearing regarding St. Gobain's request for variance. So there is some kind of awareness and engagement with some people from Londonderry.
And if I could just add that at our subcommittee meeting, there was the assistant town manager from Londonderry present who asked specifically, even though we had discussed it, echoed our thoughts that they should be added.
Okay. Does anybody have, oh, yes, Ms. Harrington.
The other thing I wanted to say that in conclusion, when all the recommendations are completed from this commission intermittently or even at the final report, it's going to be applicable to a lot of places, whether it be other communities or other contamination sites. So I think our attempt to try to include all of it now is only going to inhibit us.
Okay. All right. So I think from what I'm hearing is that we have consensus to change the commission through statute to include Londonderry and add, yes, Senator Shanley.
I'm sorry, I put my hand up because I'm not on.
Oh,
screen.
I'm sorry. I
That's
didn't see
okay.
it.
That's okay. So
I'm a rookie at this. Yeah.
and we're all navigating a new course. So I understand what everyone has said. I do not have a particularly strong feeling about adding or not adding new members, although I would not hesitate to have other, if someone felt that we should have other members from other communities that have been impacted, I would support that. A couple of things are striking me. One is I don't want to suggest that we change this commission in any significant way. A commission is a large group. It's really a heavy lift, I think. And we want not to have, we don't want to complicate this with new legislation. And I also think, I'm thinking about, okay, if we say, okay, we're going to leave it only to people from Londonderry, we're going to add someone from Londonderry, but not from other affected communities. My concern is that representatives from those other communities are going to suggest that we form yet another commission that would look at those other communities, because they want to advocate for, you know, as I'd want to advocate for all of my towns, other representatives and senators want to advocate for all of their towns. So I think your decision to discuss with Representative Murphy, her decisions, and of course anything we would recommend would go to the full commission anyway. But I think that I would tread very lightly in terms of expansion, except to note that anything we find, as Ms. Harrington said, anything we discover will have application across the board.
Okay. All right. So what I'll take as an action item is to have a conversation with Representative Murphy, share the points that were brought up today on this, and get some feedback, and then come back to the subcommittee with maybe a more firm recommendation that we can bring to the commission as a whole.
And I think that for all of us to sort of explore this a little bit, as I said, I'm not opposed to having additional members put on the commission, but I would not expand the charge in any significant way at this
Okay.
point.
All right. And I think that's been the consensus, that we would just want to include Londonderry as a participant in the commission, since they are directly impacted by Saint-Gobain, as well as Bedford, Litchfield, and Merrimack. Okay. Any more discussion on this point? Okay. Oh, yes, Mr. Wimsatt.
I just wanted to ask as a point of clarification, we have this meeting today, and I think our charge is to make any recommendations to be prepared to bring forth to the the whole omnibus commission meeting in I think it's in late October. But
Mm.
we have another meeting of this subcommittee scheduled, do we?
No, that's right. So that's a really good point. So can we agree that we want to recommend to the commission that we want legislation to amend this commission to include a representative from Londonderry? And should that representative be a town official and a resident, or one or the other? Yes, Nancy, Ms. Harrington.
Clarification as well.
Mhm.
We are going to be hearing from officially, I believe, from the Health and Environment official requests for information to be put into the report.
Mhm.
I believe that's what we're going to be receiving, right?
Mhm.
And at that point, we go to the communication committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding is that the environmental subcommittee, the health subcommittee, and our subcommittee will be contributing to a commission report.
Correct. But it goes through us.
Not, I don't believe all of it goes through
Oh,
us,
okay.
unless there's some policy recommendation that we would have to articulate further.
So then I guess that expands it even more. That I'm more confused than I thought I was.
Mm.
Okay, so
Mr.
I know the health committee, Nancy and I are getting together to write up information to be included into the interim report.
Mhm.
And our understanding is it was going to be provided to the communication committee.
Right.
And then communication committee will provide information to the policy committee.
No.
Okay, then that's what I need clarification for.
Yeah. No, everybody funnels into communication committee in order for them to draft the final report. Not the final report, but the November 1st report. Mr. Wimsatt, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I think that's what you just said is exactly right. The way I understood it is that each of the subcommittees would submit whatever they felt were appropriate additions to the report to the communications subcommittee. And then they would draft a report that we would then have an opportunity to review and vote on at the late October meeting of the whole commission. I thought the policy subcommittee was on even par with all the other subcommittees to provide input
Yeah.
to the communications committee.
Okay, then that clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we will be then bringing forth to the communications committee a recommendation to amend this committee to include Londonderry representation. Is that true? Is that a consensus?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, Mr. Wimsatt?
I'm sorry, just as a point of clarification, I thought that when, I think it was Representative Benzian brought this forth, he said that it would be two things. It would actually be including the town of Londonderry as a geography in the bill, so that the charge of the commission is to look at impacts in the three original towns in Londonderry, and then also to add a representative from the town of London or from Londonderry onto the commission.
Okay, no, that's true. I was just kind of assuming with the addition of a Londonderry representative that Londonderry would be then included in the geography.
I think, you have to add it the same way as the other towns in terms of having a town or elected official and a community member.
Mm-hmm.
That would make the most sense to me.
Okay. Any other comments or questions, suggestions?
So I will
say because I don't oppose the suggestion, I will go along with it, but I may, when we go to vote on the entire recommendation, I may suggest that we add a couple of others. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So noted. All right. Okay, then let's move on. Are there any other suggestions or things from a policy point of view that we want to capture in our November report? Mr. Wimsatt, I'd be interested to hear from you from an agency perspective, having this history of working on this Saint-Gobain issue for years now. Is there anything you can see that we may need from a policy or legislative point of view to assist in that process or improve that?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I thought about that leading up to this meeting. And actually, I think that, probably one of the most helpful things that's happened in the last year has been, making the 4 Pfas standards effective as a matter of law. That really has strengthened the agency's position and put it in a place where we can really, affect additional positive change with respect to, getting Saint-Gobain sampling additional wells and responding to the results of that by advancing water lines and water line connections. So that, from our perspective, that's really been helpful. I can't say that I can think of anything right now where, a law change would be needed for, to give the agency the tools that it needs.
Yeah. Because as I'm looking at this too, with the lower MCLs, is the agency positioned to be able to enforce those or support municipalities in the testing and water systems? I mean, are there any resources that we should be sensitive to support as the next legislature goes into the biennium and particularly preparing the biennium budget? It's great for us to make recommendations that are going to require more resources, but we also have to make a commitment to support those increased resources.
Well, that's a great question too. So to the extent that Saint-Gobain is bound to do sampling and provide water to certain parties within the consent decree area, I think we're pretty well positioned to get that accomplished. We have the enforcement authority that we need to enforce both the standing laws and rules as well as the terms of the consent decree. The consent decree does draw a line outside of which and this was, keep in mind, this goes back a few years, outside of which Saint-Gobain could be taken to could be required to both sample and provide alternate water for those wells that were above the original ambient groundwater quality standard of 70 parts per trillion. They're not bound by the consent decree to provide alternate water outside that line for homes that are shown to be impacted, but impacted below the 70 parts per trillion. So there's a little gap there. And we are concerned about what that might mean. And we're collecting a lot of data. We can get the data, but once we have the data, we're concerned about, how many homes will that be, and will there be resources if Saint-Gobain doesn't do it? If, reason to add, the consent decree was between the state and Saint-Gobain. So it was a question of what the state could compel Saint-Gobain to do in certain areas delineated by the consent decree. It doesn't mean that others couldn't, take legal action to try to compel Saint-Gobain to do things outside that line. It didn't infringe on anyone else's rights, but it did limit what the state could do. And so from a DES perspective, as an agency of the state, we do have concerns where, to the extent that we identify homes that are impacted above the new standards, but below 70, we won't necessarily be in a position to compel Saint-Gobain to provide alternate water for those folks. There's a cost associated with that may be substantial to the extent that it requires extension of water lines as well as making the service connections to those water lines, or in cases where that's not feasible, providing point of entry treatment systems to those homes. So that's that's an area that doesn't necessarily have a direct source of funding right now.
Okay. And, you know, an issue with that too is even in Merrimack, it goes beyond municipal, I mean, beyond private wells, is our municipal wells, some are over the new standards. So what does that mean as far as Saint-Gobain's responsibility? Would they be providing water to municipal customers who aren't able, because that municipal water district hasn't been able to put online filtration systems to bring the water it provides its customers below the new MCLs. So, I mean, we've got the private well issue, but we also have municipal water systems that still may not be able to meet that maximum contaminant level.
Right, the Merrimack Village District system, has engaged in or entered into specific direct agreements with Saint-Gobain to help enhance improvements to filtration in their water system. And to the extent that there are folks inside those boundaries and MVD, so the expectation is MVD will get its water in compliance, and that to the extent that there are homes in Merrimack that have been impacted that have not yet been, let's say they were sampled and they were at, 20 parts per trillion. So they were below 70, but above the new standards. Saint-Gobain would be responsible to connect to the existing water line system by financing a service connection from the water line to that home. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think it does. And one issue too, and I don't know if I'm going too out there, but I worked on legislation this past term on setting up a loan fund to support those. It would be funded by fines and penalties. There would be some initial money loaned from the state on a state bond to fund this, to fund municipalities that find that they need to install filtration systems to remove PFAS from the water. And it wasn't specific to Saint-Gobain. It was really for any municipal system that found that it exceeds the MCLs. They could tap into this money at very low cost to be able to fund what they need to do to provide safe water. Now, getting on that point, this burden is still tremendously on the state to finance that fund. And would it be reasonable from a policy point of view to say that if there is a company that has contaminated groundwater, that they have to put some money into escrow as an initial fund so that the burden and the risk isn't on the state to remediate something that is the fault of a private entity? I'm thinking back to when the asbestos issue hit nationally, and this is probably, 25 years ago, maybe. A lot of the companies that produced asbestos funded a multi-billion-dollar fund that then could be the source for claims of people who had been harmed by asbestos. So I'm just throwing it out there, is when we've heard about providing private water and linking up, I wonder if we might be able to provide a remedy to people faster if companies that use PFAS, and have been, shown to have contributed to contamination, that they could put some money up into this fund, even if it's in escrow, but to initially fund it so that the risk isn't on the state. I know that's kind of out there, but I'm just bringing that forward.
I like I understand the idea, and we do that in some other areas, and I think it's a good concept in general, but I would suggest we're not at the point of recommending something like that yet. Okay,
just putting the bug at people's. Mr. Wimsatt.
Yeah, if I could. So relative to what you first started talking about, a loan fund, actually House Bill 1264, which was passed, it was an omnibus bill that was passed and signed by the governor. It was the same bill that established the standards, also had in it a $50 million capital appropriation for the establishment of a revolving loan fund for that very purpose, to help provide low interest loans for public water systems. They could be municipally owned or nonprofit public. They don't have to be big municipal systems. And that, so that passed, and DES actually already has started working on right away, as soon as it was passed, a set of administrative rules for administration of that RLF. And actually, we expect to go to rulemaking. We were shooting for December. It may make it in December, or it may, and by that I mean we would be filing an initial proposal soon with the idea the rules would be effective in December or January. And then that will be available. That funding will be available to public water systems that wish to obtain a low interest loan to finance the capital costs of filtration for their water system. So that has been implemented.
Yeah, because I worked on that part of the bill. There was a House version of it.
Right.
But I remember having a conversation with the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee about this we went around and around, because her challenge was, why is the state having to put this money up? Shouldn't it be the people who were the source of the PFAS? So, I mean, it's not something that I expect that we would recommend, but I think as far as a policy subcommittee, it's something we should definitely consider as we move forward and look at other models for those types of indemnity funds.
I have a question that's related to what you're saying, Representative Rung. There was an LSR filed. I know Representative Bohm was the prime sponsor, and I believe Representative Notter was also on that bill. Does anyone here know about, I mean, the title is requiring parties responsible for pollution of a drinking water supply to be financially responsible for certain consequences of that pollution. Is anyone here aware of what? I've had a hard time getting the specifics on that. I mean, obviously we'll wait, we'll get the bill text, but it does seem to be very relevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah. Mr. Wimsatt?
Yeah, I can't say for certain what that LSR is going to, but I think it is important for me to point out that current law makes, if a party has impacted groundwater above standards, whether it's a private well or a public water system well, that private party, the responsible party, is responsible for financing and is, is financially responsible for providing safe, clean, alternate water for that system. That's why St. Gobain entered into an agreement with the Merrimack Village District to finance some of their water improvements to try to take care of that. That's why they, on the private side, that's why they've expanded water lines, all over the 3 towns to address folks whose private wells were implemented. So were impacted. So there already is existing law that makes a party responsible if they impact groundwater above standards to provide anybody who's getting drinking water from that. They have a responsibility to provide alternate safe drinking water for them.
Okay, I'm cognizant of the time. I know that Ms. Harrington has to drop off soon. Are there any other, moving on from this, are there any other policy or legislative remedies to address some of the things our commission has discussed this past year that we want to put forward? And is there anybody here from this health subcommittee? Oh, Nancy, has there been anything coming from the health subcommittee?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, we are planning, we have another meeting set. I don't know, it's by the end of, it's the 29th, where we're going to consolidate all that to be able to pass it on. There is
Okay.
some legislative recommendations that are happening.
Okay, I wonder if it should go through our committee.
Well, that was what I was getting to earlier.
Yeah.
We are meeting on the 29th. So if we set another date for something after that, it will be ready to be reviewed.
Yeah, I even wonder if it's possible to have a joint meeting with the policy committee, or our meeting can follow yours, just so we can capture these policy recommendations that come from the subcommittees.
Exactly. Yeah, we're meeting as a committee on the 29th.
Okay.
So anytime after that, because I know we had set up a tentative date, did we not, that we wanted to have all the information in for the report?
I think I'd have to go in my calendar, because we do have a communications committee set up. Oh, I know where it is.
The communications is on the 2nd, which is next Friday.
And that's why we're going to meet at the 29th. So could we meet on the,
Just so you guys know, there is the possibility of meeting on the 29th after the health subcommittee from 10 to 12.
All right, can we do that then?
I can reserve that for you.
is there
Okay,
anything available on the 30th? That doesn't give much time to communicate to the policy committee, that's all.
Let me see.
Do you know what I'm saying, Rosemary?
yeah, I agree. So if the health subcommittee can make up their policy recommendations, we can then review them on the 30th. And
Correct.
then they can go off to the communications committee on the 2nd.
Exactly.
All right, so the 30th is open. What time were you looking to do that?
I'm open all day. Does anybody have any preference?
I'm pretty
okay.
open.
Okay, Mr. Wimsat?
Just to be clear, I'll be on vacation next week, but
Oh, that's right. I actually have that in my calendar. You're very important. I say,
no, that's all
Mr.
right.
Wimsat not available this week. Yeah.
But I've had plenty of opportunity to provide input today, so I'm okay.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
without me.
Okay, so we'll miss you, but we'll schedule it for the 30th, 10 a.m. Does that work? Okay,
You got it.
all right. So we'll look, so Nancy, Ms. Harrington, if you can get back to the health subcommittee, just make
I
sure they're
will.
aware that we'll review those recommendations on
Perfect.
the 30th.
Perfect.
And then, Mr. Badazian, oh, yes, Mr. Wimsat.
I'm sorry, just one more thing I wanted to raise. It's not necessarily something that I'm pressing for, but I know that other groups, I think when we met in the full commission, there was some discussion about whether, any work to evaluate impacts on produce and flora and fauna. And I think I answered at that time that the way that food safety and produce and that sort of thing is really the purview of the Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food. Been really involved in this discussion, at least not with this commission. So I don't know, from a policy perspective, I don't think it's a law or a legislation change, but even just advancing the idea that there's significant interest on the commission in addressing this question, and that maybe given this our first interim report, then in the coming months and years as we're working on this, that we want to be looking at that.
Okay. One other policy thing we could consider. Last year, I had submitted a bill that would set up a study committee to look at labeling, that products that come into New Hampshire that contain PFAS would be labeled as containing PFAS. The impetus for this is a conversation I had with now retired Assistant Commissioner Frizey about the fact that there are some businesses that use PFAS, dispose of them, but don't even know that they're containing PFAS. And an example are car washes. I know in Merrimack, we have to forbid car washes from disposing of their wastewater through our wastewater treatment plant because of the PFAS that it's contributing. And so now they have to haul that off through private septic to another waste treatment facility. So I'm wondering if this committee might want to carry, I didn't submit that that LSR yet. The bill ended up, it passed the House, but because of the COVID delays, it didn't go to the Senate for a vote. So I'm wondering if this, maybe at our meeting on the 30th, we can consider whether we want to recommend that the state look at legislation to require PFAS suppliers of PFAS containing material. And it could just be, we could limit it to commercial manufacturing applications, would have to label it as containing PFAS. It could be one of the 4 that are regulated or just any PFAS molecule. So I may bring that forth on the 30th.
And I have a procedural question.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it may be something that we put off until the 30th, but we talked about adding a member from Londonderry, and there seemed to be some consensus to do that. But my question was, did we in fact have to have a vote? And if we are meeting on the 30th, we could certainly vote then. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure we didn't ignore that or think that we had taken a vote when in fact we hadn't. So I wanted to be clear for my own understanding.
Okay, so And actually, maybe my proposal about the labeling thing might be outside the scope of the commission. I'll study it some more. But it seems that, even Saint-Gobain, I don't know, I'll think about it. It's just that we didn't know that they were using and disposing of this stuff until it was too late, until the groundwater was contaminated. And I'm just wondering if, in what we've talked about, if we're looking at prevention, if there would have to be some requirement for companies to, communicate what they're using. I know if it's a regulated compound, that's gonna be captured in a permit from DES. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Harrington.
Sorry, I do have to leave now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll meet on the 30th. We'll get recommendations from the health committee. Mr. Badazian, you're on the environmental subcommittee, right?
Yes.
Were there any other recommendations that came out of your subcommittee?
I don't think anything that would rise to the level of needing legislation. I think the DES is doing a lot of things that we'll continue to watch.
Okay. Mr. Wimsatt, I know you're not going to be able to be at the 30th meeting, but if there are any things from the agency perspective, just policy, it doesn't even have to be legislation, but any change in practices that we should consider for the 30th, please send them to us before that week.
I sure will. Thank you.
Okay. So let me just kind of review our charge a little bit. I think it seems like we have a pretty good idea of what our responsibilities are. One thing was delineating the potential roles and responsibilities for state agencies and their partners. Does anyone see any contribution this committee could make in that area?
I'm thinking about what we were talking about regarding produce and food. And, we major, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be legislation, but when we meet on the 30th, I think it would be valuable probably to vote on whether to change the number of members of the commission, whether it's valuable to recommend that other departments pay a certain amount of attention to PFAS. We'd have to word it appropriately. And your labeling issue might be something we want to vote on the 30th. So I just want to have sort of the idea, things that I'd like to go do a little bit of additional research on, or reach out to constituents to know if I'm hearing anything from any of the stakeholders about those three issues, and then we will take a vote on the 30th. Do I have that sort of correctly? Okay.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Great, thank you.
Okay. And the only other thing I have to add, Ms. Paradise, at the last commission meeting, you brought something up that it concerned me, is just the length of time that some of these people are on bottled water. And that it seems as though if we could identify a scope or a framework for the conditions, people would have to be subject to that. I don't know if you've given any extra thought to that, but from a resident's point of view, are there any policy procedures that would have been better to have in place before this whole thing came up?
So I thank you. When you kind of got me nervous when you said I brought something up. I was like, what did I say?
I think you did. Yeah, I think it was you.
No,
yeah.
I probably did.
Yeah.
So when I was first affected, I think there was no real policies because we were just kind of building the plane while we were flying it at that point. But I do know there are concerns in the community because I think testing has restarted here in Bedford, and there's still a lot of unknowns out there, and it's not consistent who is and is not affected. And to be honest, I'm not completely reassured, Mr. Wimsatt, when you said about the consent decree about people being 70 parts per trillion and the new limit is at 12. Well, there's kind of, if I'm understanding it correctly, people that are now over the 12 parts per trillion are not necessarily guaranteed, or our community is not guaranteed potential access to public water for those people, and they potentially would get a point of entry. I may be confusing it. I have a Spanish lesson going on behind me, so I'll apologize in advance. This is momming in this day and
Well,
age.
Yeah.
I apologize. I can't answer in Spanish, but I can tell you. So it's a great question. So what I was trying to say is that the consent decree we entered into with Saint Cobain, which was,
Right.
was an important agreement, because what it did is it launched, several tens of millions of dollars of water line construction projects. So it was
Right.
important to do. Unfortunately, when you enter into a legal agreement, you work out something that both parties can agree to. And based on the information we had at the time, we had two lines of demarcation, if you will. There was one where we already were very confident. It was a small area, which was a red line on the map that was part of the agreement, where we're pretty confident that most of the people we sampled inside that line, or many of them, were above 70.
Right.
And we drew a larger, what's come to be known as the blue line. It was blue on the plan, where we believe, which at the time we believe circumcised the, circumscribed the area that was impacted. I'm sorry.
I wish it did that, but it did not do that to this entire area. So
it drew a line around the area that we thought described the impacts that would be, we thought it sufficiently captured everything that could be above 70, and gave us a sort of a buffer where if the standard turned out to be set at a lower level later, would still capture everything. And of course, as we learned more as time went on and we looked at toxicology, sending a very low standard relative to most of the standards that we do. We're at 12 parts per trillion for PFOA. And so what we've learned in the meantime is that some wells outside that blue line that actually have impacted as a result of Saint Cobain's emissions at concentrations above 12 parts per trillion. But under the provisions of that consent decree, while basically any impacts above 70, no matter how far away they are, Saint Cobain is bound to address those. But outside that blue line, what the agreement said, if we were to set a standard lower, then if there were impacts out there that were below 70 but above that standard, we would not be in a position to require Saint Cobain to provide alternate water. So that does leave a certain gap of people who may be impacted outside above 12 parts per trillion, but if they're geographically outside that blue line, we're not in a position to force Saint Cobain to provide them with water. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be looking for ways to get that done. And so it isn't a question of whether they would get, a water line connection or a POE. Saint Cobain would not be bound to provide them specific under state law with anything. Now, just to be clear, again, we didn't take away anyone's rights of taking their own suit. So a property owner who felt they had a good argument that they were impacted by Saint Cobain above 12 outside that line could take a unilateral legal action against Saint Cobain and try to seek redress. But the agency, using its state law authority, is not in a position to require that. So we're going to be looking at, trying to find other ways to address people. And right now, what we're really trying to do is figure out what that universe of people is. How big is it? Who are they? And, as you saw with the inside the blue line, we opted for what we gold standard of safe, clean water, which is connection to a regulated public water system. So that's why you've got all these huge water line projects and connections.
So I think that's ultimately where, I find Bedford, and Chris, you can correct me if you can know more or can say it better. I think we're in this weird position because we were only initially 61 houses, and now ours has grown far greater with the amount of testing that's happening and where it's happening, that it's outside of when, you know, just to be frank, like when everything was going down. You know, we're kind of like phase 2, and then, you know, it feels as though the town of Bedford is going to be unfairly impacted, potentially financially, based on what the consent decree was with round 1. And if I'm understanding all of this correctly, we kind of almost knew, you know, that it could have gone to where these new houses are just getting tested now. That's just my interpretation. So I think we need to try and, I don't know what it looks like yet and what the policy is, but we need to look at how, at least, you know, for our community, how we can get people off of bottled water. Because so far they've been on it for almost a year if they've fallen in this new, the second round of testing beyond the 1.5 mile radius. It's been about a year now. It sounds as though it might be potentially another year plus whatever it'll take to get a clean water source to them. Am I understanding? Those are just, they're generalizations there. So I'm thinking about, there's some confusion in the Bedford community. What the heck is going to happen now?
So these are people who live in areas where there's no plan for extension of a water main. Is that right?
Correct. So a lot of the area that's affected is not on, there is no access to a water main. And I'm living in this newly affected portion, and I live just probably 20, maybe 15 houses away from a water main, maybe. And
So
there's
is your home on
no,
bottled water now?
we are not, but the people across the street are, and 2 houses up from us are. And so it's a whole other new population of bottled water deliveries.
I see. Okay. Yeah, we're, like I say, we're still working to get our arms around the whole, you know,
I know.
that universe, and we'll be working to try to address it. But you know, I know that's not a terribly satisfying answer when you're being served with bottled water.
Not quite, but I know, Chris, I saw your hand.
You know, some of what we ran into was the pause while the new standard was under litigation. But as of August, Goldner Associates started sending out letters for access permission. Looking at the biweekly reports, I'm a little bit concerned and think we may need to have another public session, however it would look post-COVID. Because in Bedford, of the people who were sent letters August 11th, half have not responded. I look at Merrimack's response rate is even worse. And I look at Litchfield, where it's more of a hot issue, and they have much better response. So I think that, you know, there may be only space in people's heads for one public health crisis at a time. I think some battle fatigue in Merrimack and Bedford, and whether it's done by the town council or it's done, you know, EES doing another presentation, informational presentation on Zoom or some other way, I think people need to participate more, because that will very much determine whether public water extension ultimately is the solution, which personally I think it will be when this round of testing gets done. But it's going to go more slowly if people are not responsive to those letters, and that does seem to be the case. There's another round of letters that went out September 11th. It's too early to see. The report September 14th. So I'm continuing to watch that.
Right. That's so that an important thing to note is that a lot of those folks, Emma, that you're talking about may actually be inside the blue line, and that's why there's advanced stamping going on. But you know, and it's terribly frustrating for people. You know, if we put people on point of entry treatment systems, that's relatively quick. It's on a house to house basis, house by house basis. But when your intended solution is a water line, kind of got to take the time to find out how big of a water line do you need to build? Where's it going to be? Who's going to get connected? And that means that, and it was certainly true for the water lines that have already been constructed, the people who eventually got connected to those water lines in the 3 towns, many of them waited a long time for the project to actually get built and for them to get connected. You know, the good news in the end is that they get permanent connection to a public water system, but the time in between can be frustrating. So, you know, I think that Representative Mendezian, your point is really well taken. It may be time again for DES to start thinking about another public meeting with the folks in Bedford, well, really any of the 3 towns, and kind of giving them an update on where things are at. I can tell you that, you know, unfortunately, one of the things that delays it even further is that St. Gobain, because of their, you know, the way they see their legal position, they not only have to get permission to come into the home, they need to get a written agreement with each person that they sample. So that tends to take a little longer. It tends to make people a little bit more hesitant to just, you know, nobody wants to sign and say, yeah, you can come and sample my water, but I'm not gonna sign anything. You know? So that takes some time, and those agreements, you know, end up being, you know, legal agreements that require a review of St. Gobain's attorneys, and so it's unfortunate. It's a little bit, you know, slower than it really any of us would hope it would be. But you know, point's really well taken. I think it probably is time for us to set up another meeting in town. So we'll.
And Mr. Olmsted, I have a question. Are there people that have been impacted that are so far away from access to a water main that it would be, maybe there should be a policy that if an impacted house is a certain distance from a water main, and or that their reliance on bottled water would exceed 12, 18 months, whatever, that the St. Gobain would have to have the responsibility of installing a point of entry filtration system, like a whole house system.
Right. There are a number of examples of homes that just for practicable constructability reasons weren't really good candidates for a water line extension, and they were provided with point of entry treatment systems.
Okay.
Second part of your question about, you know, the duration of time, that hasn't been addressed necessarily.
So is that a matter of policy when the decision's been made for those homes to have a point of entry system? Is that a DES policy?
Well, you know, up until the St. Gobain problem, we would describe our provision or you know, requiring responsible parties to provide point of entry treatment systems. You know, the technical term is onesies and twosies. We had, you know, one here, one there, and you know, you would just make a decision of what was going to happen and you would do it. The scope, you know, of this problem is so much larger than anything else we've ever done. So I can't say there's really policy in the sense that we'd never, you know, asked a responsible party to provide a water line and water main extension for 700 homes before, you know, anything to it. So part of it, I think, is from the standpoint of, you know, getting an agreement with St. Gobain to provide this, you know, what amounted to probably, I don't know, up to now, it's probably around $40 million worth of water line extensions. They were not particularly interested in hooking everybody up to a POE unit temporarily, and then coming in and building a water line and connecting all those people to a water line. So from the standpoint of getting agreement for them to move, really, I mean, it may not seem that way, but the design, construction, and connection of these people to water systems on the scale that it's happened is pretty nearly unprecedented. It's remarkable how much has been done in the time. But you know, it's a fair question. I think, you know, at some point, you know, I think we're going to be, once we get this sampling completed and we have an idea of the scope of this, we're going to be looking to them for those parties where they have a responsibility to go design and construction of a water line as promptly as possible.
Okay. Any other items to discuss that may impact policy?
I think so.
The only thing, a couple things that have been on my mind is we have, and Nancy's dropped off, she's on the health committee. But one of the things that's been on my mind is there was some recent research, I think it was published in Environmental Health, about the causal role of PFAS. And I don't know if it was a particular PFOA or whatever on premature births and low birth weight. And I was just wondering if the health committee, and I'll bring this up with someone on them, but is there a way that we can track that better so that we have a handle? It has this, do we have any data for our impacted communities about an increased rate of premature births or low birth weight? Because since there has been that causal research been published, it seems as though we should collect data to see if that is something we're experiencing in our towns. Does anybody know if there's been that discussion on the on the health committee? Has anybody heard of that? I may bring it up to them. But that would be something I'd like us to consider to make a recommendation to Department of Health and Human Services to track premature and low birth weights in impacted communities from PFAS. Okay, all right, I'll bring that up. And then the other thing I want to throw out there is Gen X. Have we been seeing that more in any testing, Mr. Wimsatt?
I don't think so. I'm not, when you say if we've seen it more, I don't think any recent testing has shown up. It's not something we've generally seen in the drinking water wells. I think we've detected it at some levels on the site. But I don't know the exact answer to that. I can certainly check on that, but I'm not aware that we are seeing it in the drinking water sampling.
Okay. I'll have to pass along a report I read about Gen X. But it seems as though I'm just concerned that if we focus on the impact of the 4 PFAS that have MCLs, that I don't want us to miss substitutes that are being used that could have the same type of health or environmental impact. Okay, so I've captured the action items. Is that we'll have that meeting on the 30th. We'll miss you, Mr. Wimsatt, but we will discuss in more detail making recommendations regarding PFAS in food and the role of the Department of Agriculture on that, adding Londonderry to the commission, and then change the number on, I can't read my writing. Oh, on the commission. I think that goes hand in hand with expanding, but then also adding Londonderry as an impacted community. Is there anything anybody wants to add? Nope. Okay, I don't think we need a motion to adjourn. Do you know, Alan? Or
Yes, you do. You need to take a roll call to adjourn.
Oh, okay. I'll do the roll call since Nancy's gone. So I make a motion that we adjourn this subcommittee of the policy.
Second.
Okay, we've got a second from Senator Chandley. Representative Rung votes yes. Senator Chandley.
Yes.
Representative Nodder is absent. Representative Bohm is absent. Ms. Harrington has left the meeting. Mr. Bandazian.
Yes.
Mr. Wimsatt.
Yes.
Ms. Forty.
Yes.
And Ms. Paradis.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. The motion passes, so we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.